AITA for rejecting my ex who turned down my proposal but came back when I got rich? My name is Jacob, and I still have the night I decided to propose to Jessica etched in my memory. A lot has happened since then, but that moment remains very clear to me. We were together for 2 years. We were both 28, and at least from my point of view, we were going through a very similar stage in life. We both worked, supported ourselves, and had a solid level of financial stability, nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably in our Chicago apartments. Besides, we often talked about what we wanted in the future. Our relationship wasn't just some casual fling or a fleeting impulse. From the first few months, we started discussing serious topics, moving in together, having children someday, and imagining what our life would be like in the long run. Interestingly, she initiated many of those conversations. For Jessica, marriage wasn't a distant fantasy. She mentioned it naturally, as if it were a logical step we would take sooner or later. I never felt pressured. On the contrary, it seemed like a sign that we were on the same page. Jessica was meticulous, very organized. She liked everything to be structured, for plans to be clear, and for details not to be left to chance. I was different, more of a go-with-the-flow person, but consistent in my work. I think that is exactly why we fit together. She pushed me to aspire to more, and I helped her relax and enjoy the moment. We argued, of course, like any couple, but there was never anything that made me seriously question our relationship. There were no major betrayals or dramatic breakups. Everything seemed to move forward with a steady calm. As time went by, the idea of proposing to her began to take serious root in my mind. It wasn't sudden. I thought about it for months. I analyzed our differences, our goals, and our way of resolving conflicts. I asked myself if I was really ready to take on such a commitment. And the answer, after thinking about it a lot, was yes. Not because everything was perfect, but because I felt I wanted to face life, including its difficult parts, with her by my side. I knew the presentation mattered to Jessica. She didn't like improvised gestures or poorly planned moments, so I decided to organize everything carefully. I wanted that proposal to reflect what I felt and the value I placed on our relationship. I chose a restaurant at the very top of a skyscraper downtown with a panoramic view of the entire city skyline and Lake Michigan. It wasn't just any place. You had to book weeks in advance. The atmosphere was understated, elegant, and quiet. I asked for a secluded table, away from other people. I wanted absolute privacy, free from curious stares or awkward interruptions. I also made sure the menu included her favorite dishes. I knew her tastes well. She preferred classic American cuisine done exceptionally well, with balanced flavors, and nothing too experimental. I requested soft, subtle instrumental jazz to accompany the moment without stealing the spotlight. I chose the flowers with the same care. Nothing over the top. I opted for an elegant arrangement of white lilies. Jessica valued things being well done over being ostentatious. The ring was what took me the longest to decide on. I had no doubts about wanting to give it to her. What I wanted was to get it right. Finally, I chose a classic 18-karat gold band with a solitaire diamond. It wasn't huge or extravagant, but it was of excellent quality and timeless design. It cost me quite a bit. For several months, I cut back on my expenses and put some personal projects on hold. I did it convinced that it was worth it. I felt it was a concrete way to show her how much she meant to me. And then the night arrived. I remember every detail with a clarity that still makes me uncomfortable today. Jessica arrived on time, as she almost always did. She wore an elegant black dress that highlighted her features. It wasn't flashy, but it fit her perfectly. Her hair was down, carefully styled, and her makeup was subtle, just enough to highlight her eyes without being overdone. She looked beautiful, confident, and calm. I wore a tailored suit, nothing overly formal, but well chosen. I wanted to look appropriate for the occasion without seeming stiff. When we greeted each other, I noticed she was in a good mood. She smiled, made light comments about her week at the hospital, and seemed relaxed. We sat down and started dinner. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about work, upcoming plans for the summer, and everyday matters of little importance. I was nervous, but I did my best to hide it. She showed no signs of suspicion or discomfort. While we ate, I mentally went over what I wanted to say. I hadn't prepared a long speech, just some clear ideas. I didn't want to sound rehearsed. I wanted to be sincere. When dessert was served, I knew it was time. I felt a knot in my stomach, that strange mix of excitement and fear. I took a deep breath and asked her for a moment of her attention. I talked to her about us, about what those 2 years had meant to me. I told her I had grown by her side, that I admired her discipline and her perspective on life. I explained that I pictured myself building a future with her, sharing decisions, responsibilities, good days, and difficult ones too. I didn't exaggerate anything. I was direct. Then I stood up from my chair. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I took the ring box out of my jacket pocket, knelt on one knee in front of her, and looked right at her. I can still remember her expression. It wasn't total surprise, but it wasn't overflowing emotion either. It was a restrained look, hard to interpret. I asked her if she would marry me. There was a short, heavy silence. Jessica didn't reach out her hand, didn't smile. She looked down for a few seconds, as if carefully choosing her words. I was still kneeling, waiting. Then she looked up and with a serene tone, without anger or sarcasm, said, "If you had more money, I would say yes." I wasn't prepared to hear something like that. I froze, still on my knee, with the ring in my hand. It was as if the sound of the restaurant had suddenly turned off, as if everything was far away. I didn't know how to react. For a few seconds, I looked at her, trying to understand if she was serious or if nerves had betrayed her. She sighed slightly and continued speaking with the same serene tone that had left me speechless. "I'm sorry," she told me, "but I think I am meant for something bigger. Your job is fine. I'm not saying it's not, but it's nothing spectacular. You are a photographer, you earn a decent living, but I feel that is not enough for me." Every sentence hit me hard. There was no obvious contempt, nor did she raise her voice. She didn't yell, she didn't make a scene. On the contrary, her tone was calm, almost clinical, as if she were presenting a logical conclusion she had reached after a lot of thought. And that was what threw me off the most, that quiet coldness, which was so unfamiliar in her. I stood up slowly, my legs were shaking. I put the ring away almost by instinct, without really thinking about what I was doing. It was more of a reflex action than a conscious decision. I looked at her, trying to recognize in her face the woman I had shared 2 years of my life with. "If you knew we weren't compatible, why didn't you ever say so?" I asked, still trying to understand. She didn't seem surprised. She settled into her chair, calmly crossed her legs, and replied, as if explaining something simple. "Because I like being with you. You are handsome, I feel good by your side, but I don't see myself marrying you. My plan was to be with you for a while and later break up and date someone else on my level. A doctor, a corporate lawyer. Don't take it the wrong way. You could look for a girl more suited to you, someone more down to earth." I felt my stomach drop. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Throughout our entire relationship, nothing similar was ever mentioned. She never talked about levels or about us being something temporary. It was always her who brought up the topic of marriage, who talked about the future as if we were building it together. In that instant, everything started to look different, as if I had been living a version of the story that only existed in my head. "Then, why did you talk so much about getting married?" I asked in a low voice. "You were always the one bringing it up." She remained quiet for a few seconds, as if looking for the right way to answer. "Because I did think about it," she admitted eventually. "But then I realized we are not right for each other. We are on different levels, do you understand?" Again, that word, levels. Up until that moment, I had never felt I was in a different world from hers. Yes, we had different professions, but our incomes were comparable. We lived similarly, without excessive luxury and without struggling to make ends meet. "What levels are you referring to?" I asked her. "We make practically the same. I am a photographer, and you are a registered nurse." She smiled slightly, an awkward smile. "Yes, but I am meant to be provided for," she said without hesitating. "And I don't think you will ever have the financial standing to do that." At that moment, I felt something inside me break. It wasn't just sadness, it was disappointment, disbelief, and a deep exhaustion. There was no point in listening anymore. What she was saying wasn't a passing doubt or fear of commitment. It was a clear stance built on a worldview that I didn't share, and that, honestly, I never knew she held. I took a deep breath. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't make a scene. "Then, I guess we are done here," I said. She nodded casually. "All right." There were no tears. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't soften anything. It was immediate acceptance, as if that outcome had already been expected for a long time. I grabbed my jacket and left the restaurant. I don't remember exactly how I got home. I drove on autopilot down Lakeshore Drive, with a blank mind and a heavy chest. I didn't sleep that night. I felt confused, hurt, even humiliated. I mentally reviewed the last 2 years, looking for signs I might have ignored. I thought about our conversations, the plans, the happy moments. Everything became overshadowed by one phrase that kept repeating in my head. I am meant to be provided for. The next day, I decided to return the ring. I didn't want to see it anymore. Every time it was in front of me, I felt an uncomfortable pressure in my chest. I went to the jewelry store early with the intention of getting the process done as quickly as possible. While I waited, I couldn't help but think about how ironic it all was. I had invested money, time, and expectations into something that never held the same weight for her. Later, back at home, I opened my phone almost out of habit. I wasn't looking for her, but her Instagram story popped up right away. She had uploaded a photo. She was in what looked like a doctor's office, smiling next to a man significantly older than her. The age difference was obvious. He was wearing a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. The caption said, "Had an amazing time today. Felt like I could finally breathe." It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was more like confirmation. Things started to click. I understood that the levels thing hadn't been an improvised phrase. It wasn't just about money. It was about status, image, and the life she wanted to project to the world. While I was thinking about building together from what we had, she was waiting for something else, someone else, another context, another social position. I also realized that her way of seeing me was never what I imagined. To me, being a photographer was a respectable profession. It didn't make me a millionaire, but it gave me stability and personal satisfaction. To her, on the other hand, it was insufficient, something that didn't fit into her idea of the future. That photo didn't destroy me. It gave me clarity. It made me see that my proposal hadn't ruined anything. It just sped up a truth that was going to come out sooner or later. I didn't lose someone who wanted to build a life with me. I lost someone who never had that intention. And even though it hurt, I understood that I had saved myself years of being in a relationship sustained by completely different expectations. No one can force another person to share values they don't have. And not every rejection speaks to your personal worth. Many times, it speaks to how the other person views the world. Time began to pass, but not lightly or quickly. The days following a breakup like that are dense and heavy. At first, I thought I would get over it soon, that distracting myself and moving on would be enough, but it wasn't that simple. For weeks, and to be honest, it was more like months, that conversation kept coming back to my head over and over again. It wasn't just the moment of the proposal that haunted me, but one specific word, level. That word got stuck in my mind. I thought about it at work while editing photos. It accompanied me when I drove on the expressway. It even appeared right before sleeping, when everything is quiet and the mind has nowhere to hide. I wondered what she really meant by that. Was she only talking about money, status, and ambition, or was there something deeper behind it? I also questioned myself. Was I naive? Did I ignore clear signs? Did I trust too much? What frustrated me the most wasn't just the rejection. It was feeling like I had been reduced to such a simple label. You are not on my level. As if 2 years could be summarized on an invisible scale. At first, I kept everything to myself. I didn't want to repeat the story or sound like someone complaining. But it reached a point where I needed to let it out. I started talking to my friends. I told them exactly what happened, without sugarcoating anything. I repeated her phrases exactly as I remembered them. I expected different reactions, surprise, outrage, maybe someone telling me that she was right about something. But something I didn't imagine happened. Everyone, without exception, told me that at some point in their lives, they had felt something similar. Not the exact same situation, of course, but that specific feeling of someone belittling you. That need to prove that you can grow, move forward, and make those who doubted you eat their words. And the funny thing is, they didn't say it out of resentment. They weren't talking about revenge. They framed it as something almost instinctive. When someone tells you that you are not enough, and deep down you know you can be more, something triggers. One of them summed it up with a phrase that stuck with me. It's not about proving anything to that person, but about not staying where they tried to put you. That idea began to resonate with me, not as an obsession, but as a driving force. I didn't want to live feeling discarded due to a lack of ambition or capability, and not because I needed Jessica to validate me, but because I didn't want to define myself by the version she had created of me. So, I started working harder. It wasn't a radical change overnight. I simply started saying yes where I used to say no. I accepted more weddings, more corporate headshots, and more event gigs. If I previously turned something down out of tiredness or comfort, I now evaluated it differently. I adjusted my schedule, organized my workflow better, and when I could, I invested in upgrading my camera gear. I didn't do it out of external pressure. I did it because I wanted to find out how far I could go. Photography had always been my profession, but during that stage, it became a personal challenge. I focused on better defining my style, being more selective with the jobs I took, and building a clear brand. I wanted my images to speak for me without having to explain myself. It was in this context that I decided to open a TikTok account. I didn't do it thinking I would become famous. In fact, the idea of exposing myself made me a bit uncomfortable. My intention was practical, to use the platform as a public portfolio, a space where potential clients could see my real work before hiring me. I started uploading simple videos, snippets of photo shoots, comparisons between the unedited shot and the final result, and small behind-the-scenes moments. I didn't talk much. I didn't give motivational speeches. I let the images do the work. My expectations were modest, that a few people in the Chicago area would see it and hopefully contact me. But something I hadn't planned for happened. A couple of videos started gaining more traction than usual. First, it was thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands, and then, almost without understanding how, they surpassed 2 million views. It wasn't controversial or viral content in the classic sense. There were no dances or hot takes, just well-done work, shown clearly and honestly. Even so, the response was huge. My followers began to grow steadily. I didn't become a national celebrity, but in my city, people started to notice. People messaged me to ask about sessions, to request quotes, to recommend me. Many reached out saying directly that they had seen my videos. That changed my business completely. I no longer had to seek out clients as much. Many came to me. It reached a point where I had more requests than I could comfortably handle, so I started selecting projects, and in doing so, I also adjusted my rates. It wasn't arbitrary, but rather in line with the demand and the value that the market was beginning to recognize in my work. All of this happened in a matter of months. It wasn't magical or perfect. I still had tired days. I still remembered what had happened, but something inside me began to change. The frustration turned into focus. The pain became determination. I started to feel like I was building something of my own, something solid, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. And although I wasn't consciously trying to, every time I thought of the word level, it no longer hurt the same way. One day, after an especially long wedding shoot, one of my friends invited me to grab a beer. He was one of the people who had listened to me the most during the months following the breakup. His story was different, but it had common points. For years, he sold custom t-shirts at street fairs, working grueling weekends with unstable income. Little by little, with perseverance and risky decisions, he managed to open his own small boutique in Wicker Park. Over time, the business grew and became quite successful locally. While we were talking, he congratulated me. "I'm really proud of you, man," he said. "It shows that you focused and didn't stay stuck." I thanked him. I confessed that even though things were going better, I still struggled to process what had happened with Jessica. He listened without interrupting, and just before we left, he said something that at the time sounded like just another comment. "You'll see," he said with calm certainty. "The people who once looked down on you will come back. Don't believe a word they say. Just walk away." He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it like someone who had already lived it and knew exactly what he was talking about. I smiled when my friend said that, but I didn't think much of it. In my head, that chapter was already closed. To me, Jessica belonged in the past, and I didn't see any possibility of her crossing my path again in a meaningful way, but almost as if my friend had seen the future, it happened. It was a weekday afternoon. I was working in Lincoln Park, a place I went to frequently because it had spacious gardens, great natural light, and many different backgrounds to play with composition. This time, I was doing an engagement shoot for a couple getting married in the fall. Everything was normal. I was focused, adjusting framing, correcting poses, and checking the shots on the camera's display. During one of the short breaks, while I was reviewing the photos, I heard a voice that was all too familiar. "Hi, it's been a while." I turned around almost instinctively. It was Jessica. I stood still for a few seconds, not out of nostalgia or emotion, but out of pure surprise. I wasn't expecting her. I had no idea what she was doing there. She was well-dressed in expensive-looking athletic wear, elegant as always. Her posture conveyed confidence. She smiled with that rehearsed expression that tries to fake being casual. "Hi," I replied without adding anything else. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I looked at the couple waiting for me to continue the session and then looked back at her. "I'm sorry, I'm working." "Don't worry," she said. "I'll wait for you." I went back to my job. I tried to focus, but it was impossible not to be aware of her presence at a distance. She didn't leave. She stood there, scrolling on her phone, glancing up every now and then. When I finished the session and said goodbye to the couple, I started packing up my equipment with the intention of leaving without getting into any further conversation. I thought it was best to go about my day as if nothing had happened, but as I walked past her, she called out to me again. "Wait." I sighed and turned around. "What is it?" She looked me up and down without hiding it. "Wow, you have changed a lot," she said. "I'm really impressed. I've been thinking, and I believe we could try again. We ended things too fast. We should have talked more." I listened without interrupting, and I was surprised by what I felt. Nothing. No anger, no sadness, no emotion, just a very clear distance, as if I were listening to a stranger. "I'm sorry, but no," I answered. She frowned slightly, as if she hadn't anticipated such a direct refusal. "Babe, please," she insisted. "Tell me you don't miss our movie dates, going out, or the way we were together. Don't you miss any of that?" I looked at her calmly before answering. "The truth is, I don't." Her smile tightened. She tried to maintain it, but it was no longer natural. "I remember how you used to love it when I wore my nurse uniform for you," she said, lowering her voice. I felt uncomfortable, not out of embarrassment, but because the comment seemed so calculated and out of place. "That's beside the point," I replied firmly. I picked up my backpack, ready to leave. I had no interest in prolonging that conversation, but before I could take 2 steps, she spoke again. "Wait, babe. I know I was an idiot, but we can fix this. Now I would say yes if you asked me. I imagine you have a good income. You're well known now." I stopped, not because I was hesitating, but because those words confirmed everything I already knew. I turned around and looked her in the eye. "Don't take this the wrong way," I told her, "but I've always thought about something bigger, being with a woman more on my level." Her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you saying?" "I think you should look for a man more on your level," I continued. "Someone more humble." Her expression changed immediately. Surprise gave way to anger. "What is wrong with you, you jerk? Are you rejecting me?" "Yes," I replied bluntly. "I'm rejecting you. I don't want to be with a woman like you. A moment ago, you tried to use our private life to get my attention. I don't want a partner who acts like her affection is for the highest bidder. You should look for someone on that level." She stayed quiet for a few seconds, processing my words. Then she raised her voice and snapped, "You're just a show-off. You'll see. You will come crawling back to me." "Sure," I answered, "whatever you say," and I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked to my car feeling something strange, but it wasn't guilt. It was more like a sense of closure, as if a door that had been ajar for months had finally clicked shut. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. Days later, I started noticing strange comments on my TikTok videos. At first, I didn't pay them any mind. When someone starts gaining traction, criticism always appears. But I soon realized that many comments came from the same anonymous profile. They were derogatory, subtle digs, and insinuations. They didn't directly mention anything about what had happened, but the tone left little room for doubt. I didn't reply, nor did I delete them. I simply let them be. Over time, I reflected a lot, not just on that encounter, but on the whole process since that night at the restaurant. I understood that personal growth is rarely an elegant process. Sometimes it is born from wounds, from words that hurt more than they should, from moments that force you to rethink everything. I also realized that the most important change wasn't the money or the online visibility, it was internal. At some point, I stopped wanting to prove anything to her and started living by my own standards. I stopped measuring my worth with someone else's ruler. In the end, I understood something simple. When someone talks about levels, They are actually just describing their own limited way of seeing the world. And not all worlds are meant to fit together. Comment: I always find it fascinating how the moments that hurt us the most often become the very catalysts for our deepest personal growth. When someone places a label on you or tries to measure your worth by their own limited standards, you have the power to simply walk away. True self-respect means recognizing that you do not need to prove your value to people who are determined to misunderstand you. Healing begins the moment you stop seeking external validation and start building a life that feels authentic to your own goals. It takes a lot of courage to set firm boundaries and protect your peace instead of reacting with bitterness or anger. You are allowed to outgrow relationships that make you feel small or inadequate. Success is never about showing off to those who rejected you, but rather about discovering how far your own dedication can take you. I hope you always remember to define your own path and surround yourself with people who appreciate your genuine character. Please share your thoughts below on how you handle moments of rejection and turn them into stepping stones for a better future. I read every single comment and love seeing this community support each other with such kindness and wisdom. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.